point out I was early this time. Yes, earlier than all of you. Let me know when you're ready. Good afternoon, everyone. Last December, my predecessor, Minister Anita Anand, directed the National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces to move forward on every one of Madam Justice Louise Arbour's recommendations and the independent external comprehensive review. And since then, we have made some very important progress on many fronts. And yet let me also acknowledge there's a lot of work still left to be done. It's one of the reasons we're here today. Today, I am announcing the 7 people who will form the Canadian Military Colleges Review Board. And the Review Board was created in direct response to recommendations 28 and 29 of Madam Justice Arbour's report. The 7 members of the Review Board will be responsible for reviewing the quality of education, socialization, and military training in the environment of the military colleges. It will also consider and assess the different models for delivering university-level and military leadership training to naval and officer cadets and to determine what changes need to be made to RMC Kingston and RMC Saint-Jean. And in particular, the board's 7 members will consider long-standing cultural concerns in the military college environment, including misogyny and discrimination and the ongoing incidents of sexual misconduct. The board will review the benefits, advantages, and disadvantages of the way in which our military colleges currently operate. They will assess the different possible models for delivering university-level education and military leadership training to naval and officer cadets. The review board will then be responsible to make recommendations on how these colleges must change. The review board will be chaired by Dr. Kathy Hogarth. Dr. Hogarth has more than 20 years' experience as an adult education specialist at the University of Waterloo, the Renison University College, King's University College, York University, and Wilfrid Laurier University. She has served as a professor, a lecturer, a dean, and as a special advisor on topics of anti-racism and inclusivity. In addition to the chair, there are 4 other external members chosen for their independence and impartiality, as well as 1 public service executive and 1 senior officer from the Canadian Armed Forces. These members were chosen for their range of perspectives and backgrounds. And throughout the course of their work, the review board will consult with experts both in Canada and abroad, as well as with current and former members of the Canadian Armed Forces and National Defence with experience spending time at our military colleges. The chair will be responsible to provide regular progress updates to the Deputy Minister of National Defence, the Chief of Defence, and to me. And their final report will be due 1 year from now. I'd like to begin by thanking the members of the Canadian Military Colleges Review Board for putting their names forward for this crucial work. I very much look forward to working with them and most particularly to their recommendations. Canada's 2 military colleges, in Kingston and in Saint-Jean, have attracted and educated some of our country's best and brightest. These colleges are intended to instill character traits that are essential to a career in the military. They include selflessness and camaraderie, determination and discipline, the unity of purpose towards something larger than oneself. Yet we also know that these institutions need to change. The education and experience that naval officer cadets receive must reflect the values of the Canadian Armed Forces and the 21st century Canada in which we live. I believe that these military colleges can and must evolve to meet today's needs. We are already seeing initiatives at these colleges that focus on equity, on diversity, and on inclusion, and on Indigenous-related learning, all of which are in line with Madam Arbour's recommendations. But I also want to acknowledge there is much work left to be done, and there is immense value in external perspectives and external recommendations. From the day I was sworn in as the Minister of National Defence, I've tried to make it very clear that supporting our people is my #1 priority. That includes ensuring that no one is subjected to harassment, misconduct, or discrimination, ever. And it includes fostering a workplace and educational environment where everyone feels protected, respected, and empowered to serve. I believe we've made significant progress towards meaningful change, including by implementing many of Madam Arbour's recommendations to date. And these include the decision to repeal the duty to report regulations, referring all criminal cases of sexual nature to a civilian police, reimbursing eligible legal costs of those affected by sexual misconduct, and now today, by appointing an external review panel for the Canadian Armed Forces. I'm very grateful for the work of our external monitor in overseeing our efforts, and I want to assure all of the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces and those who may be considering a career in service in those forces. We will continue to move forward as we are today. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. I'll be now happy to take your questions. Ashley.
The recent exit survey of graduating students at RMC colleges looked into sexual misconduct and also discrimination. What did that find?
It actually demonstrates to us that the reason for doing this work and why Madam Justice Arbour's recommendations with respect to reviewing the culture at our military colleges is so important. We know that in that environment, there have been incidents of discrimination and harassment that has taken place, and it cannot ever be acceptable. There are significant changes that must be made. Madam Justice Arbour also pointed out to us that some of those changes are not simply a matter of issuing orders and regulations, but really making fundamental change to the institution itself. And that's why her recommendation that we bring in an expert panel to conduct a really deep dive into the culture of those institutions and make recommendations to us how we can improve, how we can evolve, is so important.
Did that survey find things were getting better or worse? Because in 2019, there was a Statistics Canada survey that found about 30% of female cadets or female members of the military college experienced sexual assault, and about 80% unwanted touching or behavior of some sort, which was much harder than general population. Did this survey suggest that?
Well, let me be clear. Those behaviors are completely unacceptable in any place in Canada, but most certainly in our education institutions. We value the learning that takes place in our military colleges. It's important that that learning environment be one which is inclusive and respectful and safe for everybody, because the learning is so important and the future of those cadets is so important to the national defense. We've got a responsibility to weed that out of the culture of those institutions to make sure that it is a safe environment. The surveys that have been done reaffirmed for me my responsibility to address that, to do it with a sense of urgency. And I want to also share with members of the Canadian Armed Forces and those contemplating a future education in our military colleges, we understand the urgency of our responsibility of creating a safer, more inclusive and respectful environment in that institution, because it's important to us. It's important to them, and we are committed to action. We've already taken, I think, some very important steps forward with implementation of Madam Justice Arbour's recommendations. There is a lot more work to do, but I think the impaneling of the expert panel today is an important step forward in enabling us not to deal with hypothetical causes for that type of actions that have taken place previously in the college, but to give us really substantive recommendations on how we can make changes and make a lasting difference.
Minister, can you just give us some clarity about what's been going on in the background? Because your predecessor told us in May that this announcement was coming within a matter of weeks. It's obviously been a lot longer than that. So what held this up?
Yeah, there were some challenges in impaneling the experts. There's a number of people that have changed positions and were no longer available. But it was made very clear to me upon my appointment at the end of July that this was a priority, and my office has made it a priority to make the arrangements now. I'm very pleased to be able to make the announcement today that we're now standing up that panel. Their work is important. They have 1 year to do that work and to come back with those recommendations. But I want to assure you that there was no delay. It was just simply a matter of some of the challenges of getting 7 really expert, qualified people that I'm hopeful as well, because of their remarkable experience and background, that people will see that we've appointed the right people to do this work, and that diversity of perspectives that the panel brings, coming from many different backgrounds, I think is going to be really helpful in making sure the recommendations are meaningful and that we'll be able to act quickly on them.
Deepfakes, the CSE is warning that they're becoming increasingly prevalent. How prepared is Canada to fend off and deal with deepfakes in the next election?
First of all, I'm pretty proud of the work that the Communications Security Establishment has done. The report that they released today, I think, talks very frankly about some of the challenges that we are facing, and certainly with the use of AI and other things. What the purpose of their report today was really to alert Canadians to some of the challenges, because CSE, I think, is well prepared to respond to that. We're going to have to continue to invest in them, because the threat environment continues to evolve as well. We're seeing, more activities among hostile state actors and other actors as well. And I think it's really important, first of all, that we have a robust system to detect, to identify, and to communicate when that misinformation is presented to Canadians, and at the same time, creating awareness among Canadians. And so the report that was released today, and your reporting on it, is also pretty important to let Canadians know that, perhaps what they're seeing in social media isn't entirely trustworthy, and that they should dig deeper to get the facts.
What's real and what's fake, personally?
Well, I think providing information and clearly identifying that which is, clearly misinformation and fake, and being able to attribute the actions to particular hostile actors. I think most Canadians, if they knew that it was a hostile foreign state, for example, that was responsible for the publication of these deepfakes, I think that'll help Canadians understand, that people are attempting to deceive them and to misinform them or disinform them about certain issues, and so that is valuable. And at the same time, one of the responsibilities CSE has on behalf of all of us is to work very closely with provincial and territorial governments, to work closely with Global Affairs and Elections Canada to make sure that when that misinformation and disinformation does occur, in all of its forms that it can take, that it does not actually have the impact of interfering with important Canadian public institutions like our elections.
Practically speaking, is that something that the CSE and the government then is going to say, like, if you spot a deepfake that was identified to be from a hostile foreign state actor, is this something where you would expect the government or CSE to be flagging that to the public in some sort of way, or would you be asking social media companies to take it down? How are you going to actually act on it?
Well, part of the responsibility, I think, is with the media companies. I think those who provide the platforms for this information, if it is being used for disinformation or misinformation, I think they have a responsibility, and some of them are now taking some of that responsibility. I think that's important, and at the same time, we are also taking steps. I honestly believe that legitimate, independent journalism in this country and media in this country is important, and we're trying to find ways to support that in the new environment in which most Canadians are getting their information online and off of social media, and to ensure that there is still a place for trusted, independent media and their reporting. I think we need to be able to distinguish that for Canadians and to support accurate information.
Where we have evidence of where these threats are coming from, these deepfakes AI, it seems that they're coming from China and Russia. What do you make of that, and what do you think Canada's response should be?
I think we've been very public, and I certainly have over the last number of years, about the hostile activities of various state actors, and in particular China and Russia, that they are clearly engaged in activity which is contrary to our national interests. Calling it out, I think, is important. Taking the steps to defend Canada against the nefarious influence that this misinformation and disinformation can have is equally important. Sometimes it's challenging to make a direct attribution to a state actor, but at the same time, we can see a consistent effort that's being made not just by state actors, but criminal actors as well, in such things as denial of service and ransomware attacks. There are a number of very significant things that we have to defend Canada's national interest from. And at the same time, I want to express some confidence in the extraordinary work of the Canadian Communications Security Establishment and CSIS. Our national security intelligence agencies are extremely vigilant in every effort, and we have to continue to support them and invest in them and listen to them when they alert us to these challenges.
When it comes to recruitment, the military is projected to have a personnel shortfall in the regular forces, almost 8,000 by the end of the fiscal year, which is up from last year. I understand the military has rolled out a number of campaigns. Why do you think it's not working at this point? And what are you going to do to try to turn it around?
Well, first of all, let me sort of acknowledge, first of all, militaries right around the world are facing very similar challenges in recruiting and retaining the very best and brightest into their ranks. And it's not just for the military. My former profession in policing has faced very similar challenges in recruiting. Part of that is related to a number of social factors, including the pandemic, but at the same time, I'm actually very encouraged by the very positive work that the Canadian Armed Forces are undertaking. First of all, to create a safe, inclusive, and respectful work environment for all of the people we are hoping to recruit into the Canadian Armed Forces, and most particularly for those who are already serving, to make sure that we work with them, we listen to them, we create a work environment which is truly respectful. And as well, there are a number of factors. We know that, and I've spoken to soldiers, and I know some of the challenges they and their families are facing around housing, childcare, access to health care, even getting a family doctor if we repost them. And so we know we also have to address those challenges so that we can not only get the best and brightest into the Canadian Armed Forces, but we can keep them. And I think it's an extraordinary career that they choose, they make a choice to serve. And a life of service can be very rewarding, but it can also be very challenging. Our responsibility is to do everything we can to accommodate those challenges, to enable them to pursue a career of service.
What's at stake, though, if you don't get those numbers up?
Well, I think the future of the Canadian Armed Forces is at stake, and it's not just personnel, but it really begins with people. I think the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces are the strength of the Canadian Armed Forces. We've made some very significant investments over the past 4 or 5 years in creating new platforms, buying planes, building ships, but we've got more to do in that regard. But making sure that we also address the working conditions and the kit that they serve in, to give them really, I think, valuable and desirable training opportunities and deployment opportunities. That's our responsibility, and so we're working really hard on that. I think the best way to do that is actually to talk to the men and women who serve, and that's just one thing I wanted to share with you, that the Canadian Armed Forces, I think, makes an extraordinary effort to reach out to its own people, to stakeholders, to listen, and to respond appropriately to the challenges people face. Yesterday we released a survey, and the results were concerning, but I think there's some comfort, for what it's worth, in the fact that StatsCan went out and surveyed 23,000 Armed Forces members. We were talking last night about some very important work that we've been doing with respect to dealing appropriately with those who face sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, and sexual assault in the Canadian Armed Forces. Speaking to General Carignan, who is responsible for that, and the question was asked of the General, like, have you consulted with your own people? And she said, so far they've spoken to 9,000 of their personnel. And I think that's really demonstrates the strength of the commitment of the Canadian Armed Forces to address these issues in an appropriate way, to listen to their people, and to create a work environment which is truly respectful and safe and inclusive.
Why not just close military colleges if so many people have reported that they have been sexually assaulted and don't feel safe and they're young?
Well, I think just that type of a response, I think, ignores the value of that military education and the good that has and can come out of that form of education in our military colleges. I think our responsibility is not to just to, like, it would be knee-jerk just to say let's just close it and lose the value of that work, but at the same time recognizing the toxic elements, recognizing those things that are unacceptable, that cannot be tolerated, and to take really positive action to address those things. My strong belief is that our military colleges there are important institutions in the Canadian military culture, but there are elements of them that need to change, and we're committed to that change. And at the same time, I also want to be clear, we're going to ask the review panel to look very closely at what is the best way to deliver that military education, and they'll make recommendations to us. I'm not going to get ahead of their recommendations. I don't want to speculate on what they might be. I intend to keep an open mind, to receive their recommendations, and then work with them and work with the Canadian Armed Forces to determine the best response on how to educate the next generation of military leadership.
You mentioned there are social factors as to why people are not choosing to join in the uniformed professions, policing and military. What are those?
Well, I think, again, I personally, I spent most of my life in service. And I now get to work with the Canadian Armed Forces and deal with people who've also committed their life to a life of service, which does involve sacrifice. And my own experience is that can be an incredibly rewarding career choice. I think we just simply need to do a better job of making sure that young people in Canada understand the value of service, that we need them in the Canadian Armed Forces, to also share with them the remarkable diversity of career opportunities that exist there, to be a pilot or a sailor, to be as an engineer or artillery person. There is a vast array of career paths and opportunities for Canadians and permanent residents to join the Canadian Armed Forces. I think we just also need to be able to assure people, they've heard about some of the challenges in the Canadian Armed Forces. We've got to convince them that we are acting on those challenges. I want to make sure, for example, when we are attempting to recruit a more diverse workplace, to bring more women, for example, into the Canadian Armed Forces, or members of minority communities, we've got to be able to assure them that they'll be treated respectfully, that it's an inclusive work environment, that they won't face discrimination, harassment, or misconduct. And so that's one of the reasons we're very public in the steps that we are taking in order to create that work environment which is appropriate to a diverse workforce of Canadians in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Minister, those are really specific things, but you talked about there are some general societal factors that you think are influencing people's decisions not to join police, not to join the military. What are those?
Well, I think, and we've seen this right across the globe, this is not a Canadian phenomenon, but the choice to engage, I think for a period of time, I might suggest that after the end of the Cold War, there was some perception among Canadian society and around the world that we had entered into an era in which defensive capability and preparedness was not as great a priority. I think the world is quickly evolving, and we're seeing a situation where there's an increase in the threat environment. And so we have to do more, we have to invest more, and we're going to need more people to do that important work, but at the same time, I think we also have a responsibility. And when you're trying to, it is absolutely right and necessary to recruit a diverse workforce, because that diversity of perspectives and an inclusive workforce is a smarter workforce, a more effective workforce. And so we're doing that work now, but we've also got to be able to demonstrate to those diverse perspectives in Canada that we are prepared to make the changes necessary to create a supportive environment for them, a safe environment for them, a work environment where they can prosper in their career, and they can do so safely. And so that's the job. That's what we're undertaking.
So what are the social pressures that you're talking about, these societal factors that are preventing people from signing up right across the world, not just in Canada, police forces and militaries? Are you saying that that's because people don't believe in the importance of service? Or, like, what are
listen, as I've said, I've not only spent my life in service, but I've had the privilege of working with people who've committed their life to service through most of my adult life. And very much now, I find now as the Minister of National Defence, when I walk into Defence Headquarters and when I visit bases right across the country, I'm meeting Canadians in every place who are absolutely committed to a life of service. We need to promote the... Yes, ma'am, but we need... Well, and I think probably, and may I suggest, I think the best way to do that is to put those remarkable men and women up front, to show Canadians what service really means in this country, what service in the Canadian Armed Forces means, the opportunities to serve on our ships and our planes, in the Army, some of our international deployments. There is a pride and a remarkable tradition of service in the Canadian Armed Forces, and I think we've got to remind Canadians, and I believe very strongly that there are lots of Canadians, when they have a better awareness of the opportunities that exist in the Canadian Armed Forces and the value of service, that we will be able to solve our recruiting challenges.
Minister, are you about a lack of secret regime officials getting into Canada?
I'm concerned about anyone coming into Canada who doesn't come here in the interest of Canada. And there are people from a number of places in the world, including, and certainly we're concerned about activities of the IRG and the Iranian government, because we have already identified them as a state sponsor of terrorism. And therefore, we want to be very careful. That's not to suggest, by the way, that Iranians are not welcome in Canada. But there are some individuals whose history demonstrates that they are not appropriate for entry into Canada, and will do everything necessary to protect Canada's national interests. Thanks very much.